In 1941, more than 4,000 American soldiers spread out across Louisiana and the South and spent months maneuvering against each other. There was no war yet, just movement, deception, mistakes, and a lot of arguing about what actually worked. What came out of that was the decision to organize the Army's armored divisions the way it did going into the Second World War. The exercise changed the force before the force ever fired a shot. 85 years later, U.S. Space Command is preparing to do something it has never been able to do. Not simulate maneuver, actually conduct it on orbit in its own domain with allies operating alongside. My guest today is the officer building that exercise. Major General Sam Bull Keener is the J7 at U.S. Space Command. He and I talked together at the weapons school. His directorate just published the Space Warfighting Environment 2040, and the first thing that document asks for the Joint Force is to train for contested space as the baseline, not the exception. That is his job description in one sentence. I'm Bill Woolf, and this is Spacepower. General Keener, thanks so much for joining us here on the Spacepower Podcast.
And absolutely, Bill. Appreciate you having me on today. It's great to see you again. We're old friends, so it's always good to talk to you.
Sir, we've been friends for a long time. I remember we were both instructors back at the weapons school way back when. And one of us chose a path to continue on in the military service, and the other one just quit.
It did. I've really enjoyed my time. Just like you, I'm a career space officer with a couple of detours to the ICBM field, and but have loved my career, loved everything I've done. Really what keeps me going are the people I get to work with day in and day out. Military, civilian, contractors, one team, working together toward common goals and objectives, and that's what I enjoy doing, and makes me excited to come to work today.
Well, sir, it is interesting too, and I don't think many people understand your career. So if you don't mind, just talk a little bit about that and how it really impacts what you're doing today.
I started out I graduated from the University of Tennessee Air Force ROTC back in 1992. Was commissioned in 93. And I remember when I got my assignment, they said, you're going to be non-rated operations. And I was like, what's that? And they were like, I think it's air battle management, AWACS, ground controller. So that's what I thought I was going to be, until literally got my orders that said Falcon Air Force Base, Colorado Springs, to work at Fourth Space Operations Squadron. And I was like, what is that? And but I headed off to training, and actually my assignment got changed. And I ended up at a ground-based radar down in Robbins Air Force Base, Georgia, my first assignment. But I was a career space officer from the beginning. I was there. I went to Turkey. About that time, the space and ICBM operations merged together, the career field. So went and did a ICBM tour at F.E. Warren in Wyoming, and then went to weapons school while I was there. And then my first assignment after weapons school was at Shaw Air Force Base at Air Force Central Command. And, at the time it was not pretty uneventful, and I worked, did a short rotation at the KAOC for Operation Southern Watch after the first Gulf War. And then, everything changed at 9/11. And suddenly CENTCOM, much like now, became the focus of the nation and what we were doing. I did several tours for OEF and OIF, and then went back to being an instructor at the weapons school with you. That was one of my favorite assignments, both from professionally and for my family too. Great opportunity to teach the new space officers what was going on, what we were doing, how we were making an impact with the Joint Force, and an opportunity to work with some of the finest space weapons instructors in the Air Force, which is still the case. And then while I was there, made the decision to switch to the National Guard. Came home to Tennessee and joined an Air National Guard unit that was doing a space mission with Strategic Command in JFCC Space at the time. But it was great because it enabled me to stay in my hometown, raise my family, back in my wife and I's hometown, and also continue doing what I love, serving my country and doing the space mission that I so enjoyed. Plus the opportunity to serve your community and your state. And then I just stayed. I stayed on. I went up to Alaska and did squadron command at the ground-based radar in Alaska with the Alaska Air National Guard. Came back to Tennessee, went to War College, worked on the National Guard Bureau staff in the A3 and A8, came back to Tennessee for group command, and then everything changed again for me. That's when Space Force stood up. And the National Guard, much like the reserves, when you were there, were looking for space experienced officers. And there weren't many of us, right, in the reserves of the Guard. And so we were standing up a National Guard Bureau Space Operations Directorate, came back for that and just kind of stayed in, and eventually ended up at U.S. Space Command as the J7. And I guess General Whiting likes what I'm doing because he asked me to stay an extra year. So, but this has been one of the great assignments. Just an outstanding team, and both at my level and my leadership level. And going to be sad to leave eventually.
Well, sir, tremendous career. And what's, I think, unique about your career is it's probably never going to be replicated again. And it's because the Space Force is now rolling out deliberate career paths for folks. And talking with Chief Pennsylvania recently, and this is really interesting, where it only goes up to Captain Major, and on the enlisted side, like E5, E6, because at some point, you're going to have plenty of opportunities beyond what the career pyramid can provide. And you're just an example of that. So to see if your career path can be replicated is probably going to be something to follow as we continue on in discussions like this. So, sir, thanks again for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to us about the word of the day, exercises. Most people who follow the Space Force understand the basic architecture. The Space Force organizes, trains, and equips the forces. U.S. Spacecom employs them. But the layer in between, the joint playbooks, the wargames, the training architecture, the doctrine that tells everyone how to operate together, that's yours, and it's largely invisible from the outside. Walk our listeners through what the J7 at U.S. Space Command actually produces. If your directorate stopped existing tomorrow, what breaks?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, when I first came on board as the J7, there was no J7. There was a J37 run by then Major General Miller, but it was definitely subsumed beneath everything that the J3 does at the combatant command. And General Dickinson, the commander at the time, made the decision: hey, we need more focus on the J7, the training and exercise piece of what the command does, and decided to separate those two and stand up an independent and separate directorate. General Claude, who's up at Space Force now, he was the one that did the initial separation, and that was about a month before I arrived, and it was probably about a third the size of it is now. And I remember General Dickinson told me, boy, your first order of business is to establish a Tier 1 exercise. We don't have a Tier 1 exercise. Every combatant command has one, and that's what I want you to focus on initially amongst everything else. And so that's what I did. That's what began, the journey. So initially, we just had an exercise division. We now have a training and education division and a war game, experimentation, and futures division as well. So I'll walk you briefly what each of those does and how they're important to what we do here at the command. Our education division, our J73, we have an academic engagement enterprise. We have partnerships with over 95 different universities, from the service academies to the service war colleges to civilian universities, predominantly civilian universities. And we partner with them for research and experimentation initiatives. We're standing up a pilot program for interns where we're going to bring interns in the command. They're going to have a security clearance, and they're going to be able to work on projects. We have the first one starting this fall. We're going to have an intern from the University of Denver Law School who wants to learn space law and work with our JAG, and then we're going to bring someone into our J79, an engineer to work from Denver to work on experimentation and wargaming. It's going to be great, and we're hoping the plan is to expand it again to a full-fledged program next year. We also do the education and training of the personnel within the command. So we stood up a program we called Comet, which has 3 different phases. One's for brand new individuals that come into the command. The other's for people that have been here for about a year. The other for kind of like continuing training for phase 3 for people who've been here 2 or 3 years. It's for civilians, military, contractors. And it kind of gives you a baseline of not only what we do within the domain, because obviously not everyone that works in the combatant command is a space expert, nor do they need to be. But it's important to understand what we do, what our responsibilities are. And it's also important to provide some training and education on what does a person do, a staff officer do at a combatant command? What are your duties and responsibilities? And those are some of the things we do for the workforce at the beginning. We also partner with those universities to provide additional certification programs and training programs that they can accomplish while still doing their civilian job, but continue to further their education. And that's been a great initiative, and it's continuing to grow and broaden from what we've done. We also work with the service war colleges. We are the focal point for space training within the Joint Force and those service schools. So we continue to coordinate with them and work with them about what they see, what their requirements are, what they're looking at, and how we can help broaden the scope of that conversation. So that's one aspect. Then we have the exercise division, which is exactly what you think it is. They're responsible for putting on our Tier 1 exercise, and that is a mammoth undertaking. One thing that's changed from the previous Commander General Dickinson to General Whiting is, General Whiting's focus is on, now that FOC was declared when he got here, is getting this command ready to perform our warfighting mission. And he sees the training and exercise piece as critical to how that's going to happen and critical to judging where we're at. That division focuses on that exercise. We actually have started a second Tier 1 exercise that we do. The first one is part of the elite constellation construct that the Joint Staff does, where all the combatant commands execute their Tier 1 exercises under a common scenario with a common storyline, common adversary, which is great. Fosters that cross-combatant command coordination. It's how we're going to fight. No one combatant command fights by themselves, and Operation Epic Fury is a great example of that. It also constrains us in some ways because the commander doesn't want a year to go by without a Tier 1. We're doing another one probably every January, at the end of every January, and that'll be part of our battle rhythm going forward. We also do a variety of other exercises. Every combatant command has exercises. They all want, and services too, they all want space support, space command support, and we have teams that do that. We can't do everything. There's a prioritization involved with it. That also involves our allies, that we go out and support them, and that's a huge piece of what we do. The last division is our Wargaming, Experimentation and Futures division branch, and we do a whole set of Wargames. There's the Apollo Insight Wargames that I think we're going to talk about later, that we do with our commercial partners, but we also, and that's fairly new, but we've done that in previous. And then we also have an Apollo Azimuth series, which kind of gets after some of the priorities for the commander, taking some deeper dives at some of the things that come out of exercises. We also have a very robust experimentation branch that partners with industry and academia to do some experimentation on some of these capabilities that we're looking at long term. And then the last is our futures, and that's the architect of our Space Warfighting Environment 2040 paper that I think we're going to talk about. It kind of complements the Space Force's Future Operating Environment 2040 and Objective Force 2040. And we'll talk later about that, about how they nest together. But those three divisions are kind of what we do at the end of the day to prepare this command to do our warfighting mission, both now and in the future.
General, thanks so much for that. Obviously, your directorate is doing a lot of work based on what you just provided and the summary you just provided of everything that the team's working on. For those who still don't understand the difference, can you just, for our audience, highlight again the difference between the Space Force and U.S. Space Command? Because I don't know about you, but I'm still getting asked questions about what the difference is between U.S. Space Command, or, hey, I understand the Space Force is moving its headquarters down to Alabama. So for our listeners, can you just talk a little bit about how you approach that conversation and what are the key bullets you think folks should understand?
Yeah, I think you're not alone, Bill. We get a lot of this. I get a lot of those questions too, and it's a continuing education process. It's easily misunderstood. U.S. Space Command is like any other combatant command. Central Command, Indo-PACOM, Southern Command, NORTHCOM. We are a combatant command. We have a defined, not geographic area, but we have an astrographic area of responsibility. So everything 100 kilometers above the Earth's surface to infinity is our responsibility. That is our domain. So similar to let's take CENTCOM. CENTCOM doesn't have assigned forces day to day or a great deal of assigned forces, but when they are called upon by the commander-in-chief to execute combat operations in their area of responsibility, the services are responsible for providing those forces, the Navy to send carrier battle groups, the Air Force to send combat squadrons, air wings to support them. We are no different. We are the combatant command. We are responsible for conducting and deterring conflict in our domain. But when conflict becomes necessary, we depend on the services, the Army, the Navy, the Marines, but in particular, the Space Force. They are one of our major providers of combat capability for us to do our mission, to do our UCP or authorized responsibilities. So the service, Space Force, they are responsible for organizing, training, and equipping those forces so that they are ready to conduct operations within our domain when called upon. And that's kind of what I tell them.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. I had an opportunity to sit down with our mutual friend, General Saltzman, Chief of Space Operations, who announced the publication of the Future Operating Environment 2040 during Space Symposium in April. And you talked about it just briefly, but can you elaborate on how U.S. Space Command fits into that document, or if there are any U.S. Space Command responses to that vision?
The Space Force's Future Operating Environment 2040, that describes the space domain as the service sees it, right? So increased competition, adversary capability growth, China's scale and tempo, Russia's disruptive approach, everything like that goes with that. Their objective force is, their look at how Space Force requirements and capabilities should look to respond to those challenges within that domain in the future. Our Space Warfighting Environment 2040 is a complementary document. Meshes very well with those two documents, and they work together to represent a unified effort for the joint force, right? So think of it like this: Space Force's FOE 2040 talks about the environment, the objective force defines the force, and our document defines how the joint force fights and wins within that operating environment. So they're complementary, they're nested with each other, and but they're focused on a little bit different areas. But they're definitely key partners in what we do.
And sir, what I loved about the conversation with General Saltzman is I asked him, I was pretty blunt. I said, so is this a prescription? Are you prescribing what it is going to be in the future? And he said, no. This is an opportunity to have a discussion and dialogue around what the future operating environment could look like, what the force is that we need in the future, and how we're going to employ those forces, which is what you bring in, which is how do you employ those capabilities? So I suspect that it's helping you describe some of your desired learning objectives for the exercises that you're planning today.
Yeah, absolutely. We look at it in a couple different ways. One, our Space Warfighting Environment document is a North Star, right? A kind of guidepost that for both the joint force and our command as well, and it's an unclassified document that kind of lays out what we think that environment's going to look like. It's not trying to predict the future because you can't do that, but it's kind of trying to point out key opportunities, if you will, that we should look for within the future and how we're going to respond within that domain. And, it's something for the joint force, the services, the combatant commands, civilian institutions, our commercial partners all together, and even our adversaries to know that, hey, we are not wholly focused on the near term. We are looking long term as well. We don't have just a fight tonight focus. That is a focus, but it's not our whole focus. We also wholly realize to be ready for tomorrow, we got to start preparing for today. So it's also, a kind of a call to action, provides that forward-leaning framework, looking at more than just on-orbit capabilities, looking at space to ground, ground to space, and space to space. So kind of looking wholly within that environment. And we see it as a way to enable our commanders' key priorities and frame out those critical partnerships with both our allies and our commercial partners too.
Yes, sir. We've spoken recently on this podcast, and we keep it at the center of everything we talk about, which is China's expanding counterspace capabilities, the weapons, the on-orbit targeting architecture, the pace of development. The picture that's emerged is a threat environment that is real, present, and no longer requiring a lot of imagination. That changes how you train. Walk our listeners through what it actually means to prepare for conflict in a domain where the adversary has already fielded the capabilities you're training against. Not projected systems 10 years out, but real ones that exist today.
Yeah, absolutely. So, from my standpoint on the exercise and the wargaming side is, it's changed how we do things in two ways, just in my 3 short years here too. So one way is to keep up with the pace of that kind of threat, you need a realistic thinking adversary to go against in exercises in wargaming. To do that, we have, you do that in several ways. One, we have a red team that provides that construct or advice to the blue players on what is red thinking, what do we think red's going to do in response to our actions. And then on my side as the exercise control manager is we have a red cell with a red czar. He and his team are hugely capable and provide that realistic, replicatable threat. The other piece of it on that side is we bring in the space aggressors to help make that training as realistic as possible. So when blue players are conducting operations on orbit, the red cell, the red team, and those aggressors are able to very accurately replicate the threat, and that just is immensely valuable for the training audience. Both here and at the other combatant commands when we're conducting our exercise under that elite constellation umbrella. So it's all part of that. That's one piece of it. One thing we've struggled with over the years, since the beginning, is a accurate, realistic way to model and sim what we're doing. And that's something that I've made a focus since the beginning, because you cannot replicate a threat, the adversary, on a white card, especially at the speed and scope and scale of what we're facing right now. So our ability to accurately model that threat has been hugely critical. And when I first got here, we looked at a variety of tools from academic, military institutions, you name it. There is no one size fits tool. So we've adopted multiple tools focused on what we're trying to achieve. So some of the tools we use in our war games are vastly different than what we use in our exercise. What we use in our exercise has to be accessible and part of that live virtual construct through the joint staff and the joint force. So it's a little more restrictive, but by design, right? So it has to be integrated into the entire exercise program. We have a lot more freedom on the wargaming and experimentation side, so we've been able to use a lot of different tools which provide valuable training and insight on what we're doing. But those tools, again, have to be augmented with artificial intelligence and machine learning and large language models just to keep up with the pace of what we're doing and what the adversary is doing. Those are probably the two biggest areas that we've been working on that are challenged by what we're seeing in the real world. But the benefit is, at the end of the day, our force here, the joint force, is more prepared and better prepared for any future potential conflicts.
So you bring up the point about the live virtual constructive environment. You remember back in the day, we always, and you kind of alluded to it already, how critical is it that weapon systems in the space domain are delivered with realistic training aids and simulators to actually contribute to the environment based on what is happening within the domain? I mean, General Saltzman's been hitting on this, at least from the service side, for a while. It's like, hey, could you imagine an F-22 system not being delivered with a realistic simulator so that pilots can train on a realistic basis? How important is that for you at the strategic level to ensure that those no-kidding injects are based on physical realities and physics-based modeling and simulation approaches? And is that a contributing factor?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back, Bill, to the discussion on the difference between the Space Force as a service and what they do and what Space Command does. We're not an acquisition authority. We're not taking delivery of those systems, nor the required and necessary training systems and suites that go along with them, but we are keenly interested in them, right? Because we can't accomplish our, UCP federally mandated Title X tasks and missions without a trained force provided by the services, whether it's Space Force, the Navy Space Command, Marine Force Space Command, or the Army Space and Missile Defense Command. So we're tireless and fierce advocates with the services, not only for those particular capabilities, but also for the accompanying training and simulation suites that go along with them. Because to us, that's a key part of it. If your force is not ready to go, if they're not trained, then that's detrimental to what we want to do and what we need to do to accomplish our mission. So not directly there, but we're not directly part of our purview, but we're definitely advocates alongside the services to make sure that happens, that accompanies it, everything they acquire.
And sir, this brings up a question to your point about, we understand you're not an acquisition authority at U.S. Space Command. You definitely look at, urgent operational needs as necessary, but we can talk about that later. How closely are folks, maybe in your shop, maybe in other directorates, tracking the Space Force's OTTI implementation plan?
So like you said, we're not an acquisition authority, but we want to make sure that there's very little daylight between us and the services as far as what capabilities they're acquiring. We're right there in it, and as far as the fight and being ready for it, and we want to make sure that we're getting the capabilities we need to conduct all of our missions. So, in my opinion, there is very little daylight between U.S. Space Command and our service components, and especially U.S. Space Force. I mean, we are in lockstep agreement on what capabilities we need and why, and they are right there. We don't agree on every single thing, nor should we, because they have bigger and other responsibilities, other combatant commands than just us. But they are definitely key partners, as well as the other services too, right? I'll tell you one thing that is even bigger is that the other combatant commands also recognize the importance of space, and they are key partners as well with our service components on what capabilities need to be required, because they see the need and dependency on space and space assets. So they want to make sure, hey, we're advocating for the same things, and nothing's more powerful when you get, as you know, up on the Hill, when you've got multiple services, multiple combatant commands advocating for similar capabilities, because they all understand the importance of it.
Yeah, that's probably the key, isn't it? Is synchronizing those efforts such that everyone wins, because everyone needs those types of capabilities.
Exactly.
Sir, let's talk about that a little bit, the service components. So the service components are standing up. How involved are like Space Forces South and Space Forces Indo-Pac or Space Forces Cent in the exercises that you're developing?
I would say not as much on the service component side. They are part of our, depending on what the scenario is and what combatant command we're supporting, they are part of that conversation. They are part of the planning conferences that we conduct. But we also equally work alongside our Joint Integrated Space Support Teams, our JIST teams, that each combatant command has. And those are key partners with us as well. And they are very closely integrated and work well together with the Space Force component from each of the combatant commands together. So I would just say that the Space Force components, they're a needed partner, and we on the exercise development side, and we work with them to bring on board additional augmentees like the space aggressors, right, and other Space Force entities that that are involved in our exercises, in addition to what's going on within the combatant command. So definitely important partners in what we do, for sure.
No, perfect. That sets up, I think, the next question, which is really getting into the details of the exercises. So on March 23rd, U.S. Space Command held the inaugural Apollo Insight Commercial Integration Wargame. 62 companies, 175 people classified. The scenario, weapons of mass destruction in orbit. The June event will focus on orbital maneuver, warfare. After that, proliferated constellations and integrated missile defense. 4 events through the end of this year. This is something genuinely new. A classified quarterly forum where commercial operators sit alongside military planners and allied partners and work through hard problems together. Tell us what you're trying to accomplish with this series and why this forum, classified tabletop industry expertise alongside government, is the best forum.
Yeah, so I think it goes back to General Whiting and a comment he routinely makes, and that is that space is a team sport. No one entity, no one nation, no one company that can provide all the capability, do all the things that need to be done by themselves. And we need each other to work together. And I think that was kind of the genesis behind this commercial wargaming series that both the J7 and the J8 are the leads on. The J8 is our requirements branch, or I'm sorry, our requirements division, and they're the ones that have a commercial work with all our commercial partners, and they are great partners to work together to put this series on. And I think what's probably not captured in it as well is that not only is it commercial partners, we had academic partners there as well, and our allies. And it's really all to look at what are some of these hard problems we have, and what are some ways that we can look at it for solutions outside of the military realm from a different perspective, from an academic perspective, from a commercial industry perspective. Maybe there's some things they're working on, capabilities they have that are directly relevant to what this problem is. Same with our allies. I mean, we work very closely with our allies day to day, but there's always challenges on the classification side, between national interests and something like that. But in a wargaming setting, it's a lot easier to look at some of these hard problems just in a more of an academic training venue that really opens up the discussion. And I think what you'll see as we go forward, you said it, as you mentioned, it's a quarterly series. This won't be the last year, where this is going to be a continuing series we do, because what came out of that first game was a tremendous number of avenues to discover, discussion points that we had, things we want to explore more that we maybe hadn't been looking at further, and it just showed the value of it and something we want to keep doing and looking at some other ways too, right? So maneuver for the next one in June right after our tier 1 is over is another one. We as a service are not the only ones interested in dynamic space operations and orbital maneuver and orbital refueling, those kinds of things. So are commercial entities as well. And so they have a different perspective on different reasons on why they need those things. Same with academia, same with our allies, but it's definitely beneficial to get all those different viewpoints in a room and hash out those hard problems together.
Sir, lessons learned and lessons observed are two different things, as we know. And so how do you take these exercises, and it sounds like you're getting after it, in such a way that you continuously iterate on the problem set and learn more from the next event than you did from this current event?
Yes, that's great. And you're taking me back to my your and I's weapons school roots, right? Flowing out. You got the whiteboard behind you. We can flow out some problems identified and observations and lessons learned. But that's exactly what we're doing here, right? I have an outstanding lessons learned branch, and I'll talk about that and what they do, and also talk about where we're going in the future that's informed by current events and what's going on now. We have a lessons learned branch, and we have, and my director in the J7 under the exercise division, and we have lessons learned managers in each of the directorates and also the components. And their job is to gather those observations during Tier 1 exercises, training events, real-world events like Operation Epic Fury, as well as wargaming and experimentation. Gathers those observations and then develop those critical lessons learned that change and improve how we conduct our mission, both day to day and while we're preparing for future conflict. It's been hugely beneficial. We're rolling the allies into that too. We have the last several exercise and events have had allies focused training objective as well, and that also drives the lessons learned piece. But it also kind of illustrated, I don't want to say an outdated, but a less flexible and less dynamic lessons learned piece. Because normally what you do is you have an exercise, you have an operation, you have an event. You collect the observations till that event or that exercise ends. Then you spend time developing the lessons learned. Then you spend time implementing those corrective action plans, a process that can take a while. Going back to our earlier discussion on, a dynamic adversary, that kind of timeline and tempo is not, is not adequate in today's environment. One thing that's come out, one of the many things that has come out of Operation Epic Fury through the Joint Staff, J7 and General Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, is we need to be able to identify these observations, these problem areas, determine what the lesson learned is and the corrective action, and implement it in a matter of days, not weeks or months or time like that. And that's where we're heading in the future, because we've definitely, that this command, just like the other commands, have taken that to heart and something we're looking at to focus on. You can't fix everything within a day or two, right? But there are some things that you can implement the change near term and in short order. And why wait until things are over and then people move on to the next crisis or event or exercise, and you kind of lose the impetus on it? But let's take advantage of the focus, the energy, and the criticality of it and make those changes now. And I think that is going to be key to making the joint force successful, no matter what combatant command it is or AOR it is in the future.
Yeah, being able to implement change very quickly seems to be going to be a challenge. I mean, our opportunity to observe, orient, act, decide, and then informed such that you can start to incorporate those. I mean, that's a tremendous opportunity, especially in today's day and age as technology continues to evolve. And to your point, let's make sure those processes are up to date based on today's technology.
Absolutely.
Sir, during Space Symposium in April, General Whiting announced that U.S. Space Command would be conducting a new exercise to demonstrate and execute the joint function of maneuver, like you've been talking about. During his presentation, he compared General Washington's ability to use deception and maneuver during the Revolutionary War and the effect on the outcome of that conflict. So, what is U.S. Space Command's plan and intent for Apollo maneuvers?
Yeah, Bill, I tell you what, I was both extremely excited at the opportunity to lead the planning and development and execution of an exercise on orbit within our domain. I think other combatant commands take it for granted that you're going to have your Tier 1 exercise or experimentation or wargame in your AOR, in your domain, but we haven't had that opportunity, right? A lot of ours is simulated. So this is the first chance. Meekly set my stress levels up because it is the first time, so we need to get it right? So you mentioned, the commander's remarks at the Space Symposium. One thing, that was also a genesis of this concept that's worth mentioning was, and something the commander mentioned, was the Louisiana maneuvers. So that kind of dated back to 1941, just prior to the U.S. entry into World War II. Over 400,000 U.S. Army troops conducted a series of maneuvers and campaigns in Louisiana and across the South. And, one of the key outcomes of that was the importance of joint combined mechanized operations, and it informed the decision of the Army to organize armored divisions as the entry into World War II started against their adversary. And they fought against, obviously, what they knew the adversary that was coming, the Germans, in particular, as well as the Japanese. And that was, something else that General Whiting thought about as a necessary analog to what we're going to do in orbit. So why are we doing it, right? Why is it important to do in orbit? And I think the commander touched on it within his remarks, but it's important. He sees the importance of maneuver. And sometimes when we look at dynamic space operations, a lot of it is about, hey, we need to make everything refuelable, right? And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the ability to do things across multiple orbital regimes, try out new concepts, because something else General Whiting mentions is that, particularly in the geosynchronous orbit, what are those objects that are in that orbit but static targets, right? And their ability to defend themselves not only is dependent on having some kind of self-protection measure, just like airplanes do, but also their ability to maneuver in and around that domain. And, I think that is something we are going to delve into in Apollo maneuvers, look at some of these key capabilities, these key operational concepts that we haven't had a real chance to do before. And it'll not only be with our service, but we're also going to involve our allies as well, because they have definite capabilities and keen insights that we can leverage as we look at what is going to be required on the maneuver side within our domain. And that'll help inform our discussions with the services as well.
Great point, sir. Really do appreciate it. Now, let's talk a little bit about Operation Olympic Defender and how it now spans 9 countries: Australia, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, New Zealand, Norway, and the United Kingdom. U.S. Space Command has publicly discussed joint on-orbit operations conducted under that framework, shared concepts of operations for space domain awareness and defensive orbital assets, and growing work on navigation, warfare, and missile warning. Training a coalition in the space domain is fundamentally different from the air or the sea. You can't put your allies in a formation and fly a joint mission. Walk us through what it actually looks like to build the interoperability that framework requires and where the hardest work is right now.
Yes, it's definitely a challenge, but it's something that we see as critically important to what we do. And to that end, you talked about some of the on-orbit operations that the service has done with our allies, and those are going to continue. I think what you'll see in Apollo maneuvers, and that piece of it, is a continuation and a growth of what that, instead of a bilateral type event, it'll be multilateral with multi-allies conducting operations with us on orbit as part of that Apollo maneuvers. What it also means is, how are we going to operationalize that concept of the multinational force Operation Olympic Defender, of which General Whiting is the commander of? How is that going to work in a conflict in times of campaigning? And the only way to figure that out is during exercises, during wargaming. To that end, we continue to expand the role that our allies in, just like the other combatant commands do, because they have allies, and the same allies, right, that they work with day in and day out, that are key partners for what they do. So we are continuing to expand that construct. We are experimenting with different command and control constructs to determine what is the most effective and how we work together, how to get those critical capabilities that they have involved in what we're doing in an integrated fashion and not a disjointed or conflicting fashion. You asked about some of the challenges. The challenges are the same ones they have been, across our careers, and that is communications. How do you see what C2 systems you use that you can coordinate, deconflict, and work together operationally across multiple countries, across multiple classified regimes? And it's not just about us with them, but also their ability to collaborate together, even without us, right? So, or with just one or two partners. So the communications piece of it is huge. The classification piece of it is huge. And trying to work through those classification challenges. And that's something we've been working both internally with the command and with the joint staff to operationalize that multinational force Operation Olympic Defender. Because right now, it's our 4 eye partners, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and we've additionally brought in France and Germany. And then there probably will be other future partners with us under this construct. So we need, it's very important that we get those security challenges worked as much as we can. There will always be things that are classified that we hold within our own sovereign structure, within our own military structure, just as they do. But there also is important that we need to be able to talk about things both operationally and intelligence freely with each other, so that during campaigning and during conflict, we are integrated partners with each other. So those are things we're continuing to work on. The work isn't done yet, but it's definitely every exercise we do, every war game we do, every tabletop exercise, the capacity and capability is greater and greater. So we're on the right road. We're on the right path we're continuing to push the envelope, and we'll keep working.
General, the Space Force is building the systems. U.S. Space Command is prepared to fight with them. But there's a version of ready that means the hardware works, and there's a version that means the people, the doctrine, the joint playbooks, and the partner relationships can function under the pressure of an actual conflict. As you look at where U.S. Space Command is today against where it needs to be, what's the honest assessment? Where has the most progress been made, and where is there still meaningful work ahead?
Yeah, so I can honestly say from the beginning, when I got here 3 years ago, we have made tremendous strides as a command and our components in our ability to do campaigning and to do operations on orbit. Our force is better trained than it was when I got here. Our ability to collaborate both with our allies and with the other combat commands has never been greater than it was. I will tell you, and this is something I think you know too, but when I go visit the units and see the Guardians, as well as the Army space units and the Navy space capabilities that they have, as well as in the Marines too, that they have never been as prepared and ready to fight as it has been in the past, and and same for our Air Force component too. They have a key role in what we do. But to me, the biggest change on the space side has been the stand up of a service dedicated to that domain, and they are keenly aware that their biggest strength, just like the other services, is their personnel, and not just the people themselves, but the fact that they need to be trained, ready, and equipped the right way to be successful in our domain. And there's still always work to be done, but I'm tremendously impressed. Now, that being said, what do we need to work on? Strictly my opinion, my boss may disagree or have different focus, but I don't think so. But we still have work to do integrating within the joint force to make sure we're tightly tied in, because we're not planning for a conflict that's wholly confined within our domain. We're also providing effects for the joint force on the terrestrial side as well. And it's very important that we are tightly and closely integrated with them. And we are, but the more repetitions we do, the more reps and sets that we do with with our joint force partners and the other combatant commands, the more effective we will be. And that is something we still need to work on. The classification challenges are always a challenge that make it difficult to integrate, not only with our allies, but with the joint force too. And those are things that we're working on as well. But, overall, in spite of, the discussion that comes across for our adversaries, whether it's the PRC or Russia or, what's currently going on in CENTCOM with Iran, we are definitely focused on those adversaries and what we need to do to be ready. So I feel, when I look around at the way things are now, to me, it's light years, not to put a Space Command terminology in, but light years ahead of where we were when I started, for sure.
Major General Sam Keener, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule as you continue to develop the exercises Space Command continues to execute to prepare the Space Force and other services to fight and win in space.
Thanks, Bill, man. It's a pleasure to be here. It's great to see you again. I'm been honored to be hosted on here too. As a career space officer, I'm not in the service, I'm not in the Space Force, but I'm definitely a proponent of everything they do. And a lot of my not a lot, but some of my old students are still in the Space Force. Now making the rank of general officer too, which is always gratifying to see, right? See those guys do so well. And like I said, I'm a huge proponent of the Space Force, and I'm a huge proponent of what you and your organization do as well. I'm a Space Force Association member, and it's because I see it as a key advocate for what the services is doing, and that is something that we're always interested in too. So both personally and professionally. Really appreciate everything you and your team do.
Thank you, sir, for your friendship, and thanks you for your continued leadership in U.S. Space Command.
Absolutely.
General Keener's problem is a training problem. How do you make the fight real for the force that has to fight it? There's a second problem sitting right behind it. How do you make that fight legible to the people who decide what the force gets? Senior leaders, members of Congress, people who have to make decisions about capabilities they cannot see in a domain they have never operated in, usually described to them with slides. That's the problem the National Spacepower Center was built to take on. The NSPC is an SFA effort, and its initial industry consortium just delivered its first integrated demonstration. At General Saltzman's request, they built a vignette called Space Dogfighting. It pulled orbital data, physics-based simulation, command and control software, engineering models, and immersive visualization into a single physical environment, and it turned what happens on orbit into mission consequences a decision maker can actually follow. That was the consortium's first deliverable. More industry partners and more scenarios are coming. Let me be clear about one thing. The NSPC is not the classified modeling U.S. Space Command uses to run a Tier 1 exercise, and General Keener did not come on this show to talk about it. But it is the same fundamental problem at a different altitude. If you cannot represent the space fight honestly, then the force trains against a fiction, and the people resourcing that force decide against a fiction. One of those failures shows up in an after-action report. The other one shows up in a budget. General Saltzman made the argument for years, in a lot of rooms, that the hardest part of his job was helping decision makers understand what space operations actually are. The NSPC is an attempt to stop making that argument with words. Here is why this matters to us. Advocacy is easy when the subject is a program with a price tag. It is harder when the subject is a training architecture, modeling and simulation, and joint playbooks. Those things do not launch. They do not photograph well, and they are exactly what determines whether everything we advocate for works when the nation needs it. Make sure to read the Space Warfighting Environment 2040 for yourself. It is public, and it was written for you. If you want to be part of that work, join us at ussfa.org. Spacepower is produced by Ty Holliday. I'm Bill Woolf, and we'll see you next time.